In 1933, I found myself trapped in New York City with exactly 17 cents in my pocket and no way home to Barbados. No job, no prospects, no friends with money to lend. Every door I knocked on closed in my face. I was, by all reasonable measure, completely stuck. Now, most who find themselves in such circumstances do what seems natural. They struggle, they worry, they make plans and backup plans. They assume their limitation and then try to work within it. This, my friend, is precisely why they remain trapped. But I did something that seemed, even to me at the time, completely mad. I assumed I was already in Barbados while sleeping in a cold room in Manhattan. I lived in my assumption so completely that within weeks, circumstances I could never have arranged began arranging themselves. The impossible became inevitable. Tonight I will tell you exactly how I did this, because the method I used in 1933 is the same method that will free you from whatever prison you have built around yourself. But first, you must understand why everything you think you know about getting what you want is backwards. Now, my friends, what I am about to tell you changed everything I understood about the nature of reality itself. You see, when I found myself in that predicament in 1933, I did what any reasonable man would do. I looked for work. I asked friends for loans. I explored every practical avenue I could imagine. Day after day, I walked the streets of Manhattan, knocking on doors, seeking any opportunity that might provide passage home. And day after day, every door closed, every lead disappeared, hope vanished. I was becoming desperate, my friend. The little money I had was nearly gone. Winter was approaching, and I had no warm clothing suitable for a New York cold season. I had come to New York for what I thought would be a brief visit, but now I was trapped by circumstances completely beyond my control. It was in this state of desperation that I went to see my old teacher, Abdullah. I poured out my troubles to him. I explained my situation in great detail, expecting sympathy, some practical advice, or at least a kind word of encouragement. But Abdullah looked at me with those penetrating eyes of his and said simply, "You are in Barbados." I protested. I said, "Ab, I am in New York. Look around you. We are sitting in your apartment in Manhattan. I am broke. I have no ticket. I have no means to get home." And he said again, more firmly this time, "You are in Barbados." Then he turned away from me as though the conversation was finished. I was stunned, my friend. At first I thought he had misunderstood me, but Abdullah never misunderstood anything. As I walked home that evening, his words echoed in my mind. "You are in Barbados, not you will be in Barbados, or you can get to Barbados. You are in Barbados." And then slowly I began to understand what he was teaching me. He was not speaking of my physical location. He was speaking of my assumption. He was telling me that I must assume I was already where I wanted to be, not hope that someday I might get there. But understanding this principle intellectually, my friend, is not enough. I had to learn to live it. But hold this thought. There is a precise moment between making the assumption and falling asleep when most people lose the state entirely. Without recognizing that moment, you will practice this technique and wonder why nothing changes. I will show you exactly that moment in just a few minutes, for it determines whether the law works for you tonight or remains theory. That night, I went to my small room and I began to experiment with what Abdullah had told me. Instead of falling asleep thinking about my problems, instead of worrying about my circumstances, I decided to fall asleep in Barbados. I lay on my narrow bed in Manhattan and I began to imagine I was in my familiar bed in Barbados. I felt the tropical warmth on my skin instead of the New York chill. I listened for the sound of the trade winds through the palm trees instead of the noise of traffic. I breathed in the scent of frangipani instead of the city air. At first, my friend, it required great effort. My senses kept pulling me back to the reality of where I physically was. The sounds of New York would intrude. The feel of the unfamiliar bedding would remind me of my actual location. But I persisted. Night after night, I fell asleep in Barbados while my body remained in New York. I began to live from my desired state instead of from my circumstances. During the day, when thoughts of my predicament would arise, I would gently remind myself, I am in Barbados. When I walked the streets, I walked as a man who was simply visiting New York, not as a man trapped there. The key, I discovered, was not just to think I was in Barbados, but to feel I was there. I had to generate within myself the feeling that would be mine if I truly were home. The relief, the familiarity, the sense of belonging. Feeling is the secret, my friend. Without the feeling, the assumption remains merely an intellectual exercise. Night after night I did this. But I must tell you, my friends, it was not without its challenges. There were moments of doubt, days when my circumstances seemed to mock my assumption. I would wake up in that cold room and for a moment forget my practice, feeling the full weight of my situation pressing down upon me. There were times when I wondered if I was simply deluding myself, engaging in wishful thinking while my real problems remained unsolved. The people around me certainly thought I had lost my reason. When they would ask about my plans to get home, I would speak with the confidence of a man whose passage was already arranged, though I had no such arrangements. They looked at me as though I had taken leave of my senses, but I remembered Abdullah's words and I remembered his method. You see, my teacher had taught me that assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. The key word here is persisted. Most people assume they're good for a day, a week, but the moment circumstances seem unchanged, they abandon their assumption and return to assuming their limitations. Now, I must insist on this, my friend. This is where most who try to apply this law fail. They assume their desire is fulfilled when they feel like it, when it is convenient, when their mood is good. But when contradictory evidence appears, when the physical world seems to mock their assumption, they abandon it in favor of assuming what they can see. Do not let anyone, including yourself, talk you out of your assumption once you have made it. The world will test you, your senses will contradict you, your friends will call you foolish, but you must persist. But I had learned from Abdullah that you must persist in your assumption regardless of what your senses tell you. The assumption must come first. The evidence follows, never the reverse. Now I must tell you something most teachers will not. There is a detail in this teaching that has been stripped from every modern interpretation of the law. Most speak of assumption as though it were positive thinking or affirmation. I will tell you that detail now, and it changes everything. Remember what I told you a few moments ago about persistence. Now, this is where you see why it matters so completely. After I had been practicing this for 3 weeks, living mentally in Barbados while physically in New York, something remarkable occurred. I received an unexpected letter from home. A distant relative had written to say that she had been thinking of me and wondered how I was faring in New York. This was unusual as we rarely corresponded. A few days later, I happened to meet on the street a man I had known briefly years before. He mentioned that he had recently met someone who had asked about me specifically. Again, this seemed an odd coincidence. Then, within the same week, I encountered a woman who had heard of my desire to return to Barbados. She mentioned that she had a friend who worked for a shipping company and he might know of opportunities for someone willing to work his passage home. Now, to most people, these would seem like fortunate coincidences, but I knew better. I recognized them as signs following my assumption. You see, my friend, when you truly live in the state of the wish fulfilled, your world begins to rearrange itself to conform to your assumption. What appear to others as lucky breaks or happy accidents are simply consciousness made visible. I followed each of these leads not desperately as I had done before, but with the quiet confidence of a man who knew his assumption must externalize. And indeed, through that chain of seemingly coincidental meetings, I was offered exactly what I needed: passage home to Barbados in exchange for light duties aboard ship. But here is what I want you to understand most clearly. These opportunities did not appear because I was a fortunate man or because I was deserving. They appeared because I had changed my fundamental assumption about myself and my situation. I had stopped assuming I was trapped and began assuming I was free. I had stopped living from my problem and began living from my solution. Now, what does this mean for you? The principle that governed my experience in 1933 is the same principle that governs every area of human experience. It is what I have called the law of assumption. Whatever you assume to be true about yourself, about others, about your circumstances, if you persist in that assumption, will harden into fact. The world will tell you that you must first see the evidence, then make the assumption. I tell you they are wrong. They have it completely backwards. They think they must wait for their circumstances to change before they will assume things are different. But this is to misunderstand completely the nature of creation. You do not wait for evidence to support your assumption. Your assumption creates the evidence. Consciousness is the only reality. The world you see around you is simply your consciousness pushed out, made visible. If you want to change your world, you do not start with the world. You start with your consciousness. You start with your assumption. When I assumed I was in Barbados, I was not engaging in positive thinking or wishful thinking. I was applying a fundamental law of mind. I was impressing upon my subconscious mind a new set of facts, and my subconscious mind, which is the builder of circumstances, began immediately to construct a world that corresponded to those facts. This is why feeling is so crucial to the process. Your subconscious mind responds not to your words but to your feelings. If you assume you have something but feel you lack it, the feeling will win every time. But when you can assume your desire fulfilled and feel the naturalness of that assumption, when it feels more real to you than your present circumstances, then you have successfully impressed your subconscious mind. I have told you before that imagination creates reality. But let me be more specific. Imaginal acts, when they have the feeling of reality, when they produce in you the emotions that the actual fulfillment of your desire would produce, these imaginal acts become facts in your world. So tonight, my friend, I want you to apply this very principle to whatever seems impossible in your life. Whether you desire health, wealth, love, success, or any other thing, the method is the same. You must assume you already are what you want to be, you already have what you want to have, you already experience what you want to experience. You have heard me speak of the state akin to sleep, and many have misunderstood me. Let me be plain. I do not mean you should be drowsy or half conscious when you do this work. I mean that relaxed, receptive condition between waking and sleeping when your critical, analytical mind releases its guard and your subconscious mind becomes impressionable. In this state, your imaginal acts sink deep into consciousness and become the seeds of your future experience. Before I tell you how to apply this tonight, there is one final thing about what happens the moment you wake that determines whether any technique sticks. Most people destroy their assumption within seconds of waking by returning to their old pattern of thought. I must address that now, for it separates those who see their world respond in 2 weeks from those who never do. Tonight, when you retire, do this. First, you will enter that drowsy state akin to sleep, that relaxed condition between waking and sleeping when your conscious mind relaxes its guard and your subconscious mind becomes impressionable. Second, in that state, you will construct a simple scene which would imply the fulfillment of your desire. Make it a scene in which you would naturally find yourself if your assumption were already fact. Third, you will not strain to hold this scene, but you will gently repeat it, feeling its naturalness until it has the vivid reality of an actual experience. And fourth, you will fall asleep within this assumption, making it the last impression upon your mind before sleep claims you. Do not make the scene complicated, my friend. If you desire to be elsewhere, imagine you are there and feel the reality of being there. If you desire health, imagine a friend congratulating you on how wonderful you look and feel the pleasure of that congratulation. If you desire wealth, imagine having the money you need and feel the security and freedom that wealth would give you. But remember, you must persist in your assumption. Do not do this for one night and then abandon it when your world seems unchanged. Night after night, live in your assumption. Day by day, walk in the confidence of your assumption. Make your assumption more real to you than the evidence of your senses. And here is that moment I promised to show you. The moment you wake in the morning, before you open your eyes, before you think of your day's problems, return immediately to your assumption. Feel it real again. Do not let your first thoughts be of lack or limitation. Let your first conscious moment be spent in the state of the wish fulfilled. This, my friend, is what keeps the assumption alive throughout your day. I tell you with certainty, and this is not opinion, it is law. What you persistently assume to be true will become true in your experience. It is not a matter of belief or faith, though both may help. It is a matter of psychological law. Consciousness is the only reality, and assumption is the way consciousness creates. I tell you this from my own experience, from the experiences of countless students who have applied this law successfully, and from an understanding of the fundamental nature of mind itself. You are not a victim of circumstances, you are the creator of circumstances. The moment you truly understand this and begin to live from this understanding, your world must change to conform to your new assumption about yourself. The question is not whether this will work for you. The question is whether you will persist in the assumption long enough for it to harden into fact. Most people give up too soon. They assume they're good for a few days or weeks, but when they do not see immediate evidence, they conclude the law does not work and return to assuming their limitations. But I tell you, the law never fails. If you will persist in living in the assumption of your wish fulfilled, if you will feel it real night after night until it becomes natural to you, your world has no choice but to conform to your assumption. This is not philosophy, my friend. This is practical mysticism of the highest order. And now I tell you, my friend, the secret you have just heard is not a secret at all. It has been hiding in plain sight in every word I have spoken. The assumption, my friend, the assumption. When you assume the wish fulfilled, you do not perform a technique or practice a method. You enter a state of consciousness, and from that state, the world has no choice but to rearrange itself to match what you are assuming to be true. This is why I could sleep in Barbados while in New York. I was not pretending, I was not visualizing, I was assuming. An assumption is a state of mind. Tonight, when you retire, do this just once. Enter that drowsy state, assume your wish is already fulfilled, feel its naturalness, sleep in that assumption, that is all. You may wake tomorrow to find that consciousness has begun its perfect work, or you may find that your assumption needs persistence for many nights. Both are well, my friend, both are natural to the process. The world will try to convince you that your assumption is false. Your senses will contradict you, your reason will protest. But remember what I have told you tonight. You are not at the mercy of circumstances. Circumstances are at the mercy of your assumptions. Consciousness is the only reality. Imagining creates reality. Assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. May you sleep tonight in the Sabbath rest of your assumption fulfilled. May your desired state become so natural to you that you forget you ever lived without it. May you discover, as I discovered in 1933, that there is nothing impossible to consciousness. Until we meet again, my friend, may you live forever in the beautiful assumption of your wish fulfilled.